This is episode 12 of The Winner's Circle, a drag racing podcast. I'm your host, Leroy Lease. Our goal is to help you win more rounds at the track by sharing tips and tricks. This is episode 12, brought to you by the Practice Tree app. Practice Tree is an app on iTunes for iPhone or iPad, and right now it's on sale. Yeah, until August 18th. It's only 99 cents. This is a sweet deal. We custom made this practice tree just for racers. You get a pro tree or a full tree. You can do handicap starts, adjust your index or dial in. I think it's the best practice tree app for anyone using an iPad or iPhone, and you can set it up quickly and easily, and you can even share your awesome reaction time. So if you're killing it before that first round, you can post it to Facebook and intimidate your competition. And anyway, it's on sale, 99 cents until August 18th. For this episode, we're going to cover new driver training, but really this is something that any seasoned veteran racer could use too. But before we dig in, I want to encourage you to check us out at DragTracker.com. On the right side of the website is a voicemail link. If you click that link, you can leave me a voicemail and share stories or questions for a future topic on the show. Also, to leave a comment about this episode, go to DragTracker.com/podcast and click on episode 12. There you'll find a transcript with links and notes from the show. Finally, we put out a YouTube version of every podcast episode except for this one. We're starting to do some of our podcasts on audio only. But if you want to check us out and interact with our YouTube channel, please do so at youtube.com/dragtracker. Also, we'd be very grateful if you could rate us on iTunes. If you're checking us out on Stitcher, you want to bounce over, just leave a comment or a rating, and that'll help us get more visible to other people interested in drag racing podcasts. It's also worth mentioning that the WFO Radio Nitro podcast radio show is it's just a lot of fun. I really enjoy listening to it, getting insight from WFO Joe, but also hearing interviews with like John Force and Jason Line and just hearing them talk about the inner workings of a professional team. It's really interesting. So anyway, I encourage you to check out WFO Radio Nitro. All right. Today's episode is something that is a bit persuasive. I want to convince you that here are some things that even if you're not a new driver, I mean, I've labeled this new driver training, but every driver should go through and think through some specific things so that they're sure that they're keeping their race car safe and available to win rounds, right? Our goal is to win rounds, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you have the tools, tricks, tips, everything you need to help you win rounds. So in order to win rounds, you need to be safe, and that's sort of my position. That's why my tagline is always race safe, race to win. But that's because there are things that I think you need to have thought through, at least before you get strap in for eliminations, just so that you're ready, because anything can happen on the race course. If we've seen anything with what happened with the sprint cars and Tony Stewart lately, this is relevant. We are on a straight track, and it's usually your car probably takes between 3 and 19 seconds to go the distance of either an eighth mile, 1,000 feet, or quarter mile. But there are things that can happen, and if you haven't ever thought through it, how do you know how you'll handle it? So that's sort of our what I want to convince you of today, and that's what I'm talking through. The first main thing to think through is getting to know your car. And what I mean by that is in episode 3, we talked about getting to know or remembering where all your switches are. You know, that when you sit in your car, you should be able to close your eyes and be able to know exactly what switch you could reach for and turn on or off, know exactly what it does. If somebody said to you, hey, you need to turn off the fan, you could reach up with your eyes closed and flip that switch. It needs to be something where you feel very comfortable just sitting in your car. You know all its blind spots. You know that when the hood scoop is on that you can't see very well what exactly you're missing. You also, as part of getting to know your car, you need to be very comfortable strapped tightly into your seat with your seat belts. You need to know what that feels like. Where is that fifth strap that comes up from the bottom? How long, how tight should it be so that you're still comfortable? Sometimes when we are sitting in the staging lanes and a car brakes, we sit there with our seatbelts on. Does it rub across your lap in the right place, or is it painful? Is there some reason you wouldn't be comfortable sitting there for 20 minutes and then racing? These are things that are you might not think about, but I think it's important that a new driver specifically is very comfortable sitting in their seat. So getting to know where all your switches are, being comfortable, tightly strapped into your seat, but then finally, as part of getting to know your car, is have someone stand, one person, walk around each corner of your car so you can see them and see exactly how far away that is. It gives you a perspective. So, for instance, if some of the corners that I pay the most attention to are the front driver's corner and the front passenger corner. Where exactly are those corners? Like, I'll have somebody stand up and put their leg or their hip against the corner of the car, and I go, okay, that's where the corner of my car is, and that gives me a sense of depth and how big of a car I'm in. This is important for when you're even loading on the trailers, to know how your car is there. And a lot of times a race car, it's not something you drive every day. In your daily driver, in your minivan that you cart the kids around in, you have a sense of what it takes to turn that car into a parking spot when you go get groceries. But your race car, do you have a sense of where the corners are? I mean, if you drive a rail car or altered, it's a completely different car than driving grandma's minivan, right? I mean, wouldn't you agree? So it's important to have a reference, a check. And, even a seasoned driver could benefit from having someone that they know how tall they are, they know what that perspective looks like, to go stand at every corner of the car. Another benefit is if they're standing at the rear corner, now you can start to see, wow, I can't even see that person. What a blind spot. You may not have realized that you completely cannot see that corner, which is important then. If you are the slower car and a car is chasing you down, they're in the right lane and you're in the left lane, now you know, if they're in their blind spot, exactly where they are. I mean, if you can't see them when you turn your head, that's where they are. And it's also important to do this test where you have someone standing at each corner while you have your seatbelt on and your helmet, so that you know, wow, my mirrors don't cover that spot. It's definitely a blind spot. Or my helmet is restricting movement, so I'm not going to be able to see that spot of around my car while the person's coming down on me. So get to know your car. Not only should you have someone stand at all four corners, but get them to stand at each tire too, because a lot of times, the tires aren't at the corner, but the tire is what is going to trip each light as you go through the quarter mile or the eighth mile. So have a person stand at the tire and get a sense of, are they standing in the middle of the tire, the front of the tire? Because if I'm trying to close up the gap at the finish line, I don't want to be more than a tire length ahead. I want to be able to cut it that close. Well, I need to know where my tires are. In my race car, a 68 Firebird F-body, the tire is a little bit, just a hint in front of where my feet are. So if I sort of am picturing in my head my feet extend out past through the firewall, I can start to picture, okay, exactly where these tires are and what that means for when I look out the window, how far in front of me or behind my feet and my tires my opponent is. And that applies whether you're looking out the left side or the right side, but it's really important to know your car that well. And that doesn't mean you have to sleep in it. That couldn't hurt, I guess. You'll definitely get a sense of how comfortable it is if you're trying to do that. But, you cannot discount how valuable that time spent sitting in your car, being comfortable, getting more comfortable with it will be when you're actually in a race. It takes that many things out of the equation that are unknown. So there you go. Get to know your car. The number 2 thing is thinking through certain scenarios. Now, when I was learning to drive, there were some things. I grew up in the Maryland area with Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. Very defensive driving techniques are what we kind of focused on when I was learning to drive, because those beltways are ridiculous. There are people, road rage, all that kind of stuff. So I would actually, when you're on the beltway, there's 6 lanes of traffic that you're on. If you're in the 4th lane, I would start to kind of think about things like, what would I do if I got a flat tire right now? I would have to hit the blinker, and if it's on the left side, I'd have to cut across 2 lanes to get to the shoulder on the inside of the road. If I was in the, if it was on the right side of my car, oh my goodness, I'd have to cross 4 lanes of traffic. Or maybe not. Maybe I should still go to the left lane. So occasionally, while I'm driving down the interstate or on a beltway, I'm thinking through, what am I going to do if I get a flat tire? Well, the exact same thing applies for racing. So some of the things that can happen while you're racing are losing the brakes. What would I do if I lost the brakes at the finish line? Well, you would need to downshift, or you would need to find a way to slow the car down, parachute or emergency brake. Why not think through that? What would I do if I lost the brakes? What am I going to do if the drivetrain breaks? So if the drive shaft, what if it breaks? What if you lose the rear? I'll tell you, some indication is going to be that the RPMs are going to go through the roof. As soon as you feel like it's become unbridled or let loose, you need to let off the gas, right? You need to let off the gas, throw it into neutral, and these are things that you should think about, because I've seen the drivetrain break. I've seen wheels come off. What would you do if a wheel came off? Think about it. If it was a slick and your car isn't perfectly balanced, there's a good chance it's going to fall back, and now you'll be looking up at the sky. So you have to be kind of aware. Well, if a tire fell off, depending on which tire it was, I'm going to be looking at the sky, and not exactly, you're not going to be pointed up, straight up into the sky, but you're going to lose some of your sense of what straight is. So how far are you going to turn to the left or right to get over toward the wall without hitting the wall? That's something to think about. And I'm not trying to get anybody paranoid, going through all these things like what would you do? But guess what? I've had engines blow. I've been in the car when the drivetrain is broken. I've lost the brakes at the finish line. I've seen opponents lose parts. What if the guy in the lane across from you loses his hood? I've seen hoods blow off. That's certainly a possibility if they don't get their fasteners on. If the hood blows off and comes over into your lane, what are you going to do? Are you going to swerve? Are you going to hit the brakes? Are you going to go through it? These are all options, and it probably depends. And I'm not saying just focus and only think about these all the time, but you need to think about it at least once. What would that look like for me, and what would I feel comfortable as the result? Would I want to put my car into the wall, or would I just try and give up the run? What if I lost that round because the guy lost a part? I don't know. That's something to think about. Would I be comfortable knowing that I had to let off and give up the run just to save his car parts? That's something to think about. And I don't know that there's always a right or wrong answer, but I'll tell you, one time I was in a time run, and our hood, I noticed, was loose. A couple of the fasteners had come loose, and so there I am. It was quarter-mile racing, and the hood starts wibbling and wobbling because it's getting air up under it, and I let off. I said, it's not worth it to potentially lose the hood. I'm going to give up the ET. I'm not going to get a good time run, but I know what kind of traction we got, and I know how the air is, so it's probably not that big a deal. But I made a decision, and I had already decided, if the hood ever seems like it's coming off, even in eliminations, hoods are so expensive, the paint job's so expensive, I'm going to give it up. I need to just let off and go, well, we need to pay more attention next time. But I'm not trying to win at all costs. This is not Top Fuel NHRA drag racing for me. It's sportsman level racing, which means every time I decide to push through, there are consequences. I'll tell you, when an engine's getting ready to give up, at least for our cars, when I've driven a car where an engine blew, the engine, as it was getting ready to blow up, it started to decrease in RPM. And I had it floored. I wasn't letting off, but the RPM was coming down. Did I let off? No. Your instinct is to push sort of harder. Did I let off? No. You need to let off. You need to let it, because there's a chance you can save this before it completely blows up. Now, maybe there isn't a chance, but I don't think you need to continue flooring it. If something seems wrong with the engine or the drivetrain, or something's acting out of normal for your run, you need to let off, right? So this is something that maybe a brand new driver isn't going to have a sense of, but you need to have talked it through with whoever the owner of the car is or whoever you're coaching. Have talked about, I don't expect a wheel to come off of your car, and I wouldn't expect it to come off your opponent's car, but what if it does? Well, what if it's still attached to the axle and this thing comes across into your lane? What are you going to do? At 120, 130, 40, 50 miles an hour, I don't recommend doing a hard left-hand turn. It's just not... Drag racing cars are made to go straight. Hooking a left-hand turn at that kind of mile per hour to avoid something, well, you want to have thought through it. You want to not have to make that choice in the moment. You want to have sort of made your decision and mapped it out. And you know, what's interesting, I hadn't planned to say this, but it also applies to when you're towing. When I'm towing the rig to the track, I'll gauge a red light, and I'll go, you know what, I pick a point on the road that if I get to that certain point and it turns yellow, it doesn't matter. I'm going to keep going. I'm just going to hit the gas because I have to have known ahead of time. I don't want to get to a light that's turning yellow and then slam on the brakes and risk A, being rear-ended, but B, also having the trailer push my entire rig through the intersection and I end up hitting somebody anyway. So as I approach a red light, I let off a little bit, if it's green light at the time. I let off and kind of coast until I get to that sort of point of no return where even if it turns yellow, I'm going to hit the gas and go through it. I'm not going to hit the brake. That's just something I always do as I come up on red lights. So it's something that it's pre-planning. It's making this cutoff point where if the drive shaft breaks, I got to let off the gas. And you know what? I'm going to pull over to the side because it's a good chance I'm either putting rear end fluid or oil or tranny oil all over the track. So make a plan that the engine gets shut off immediately, I let off the gas, all these things, and I pull over. Same thing when an engine blows. So think through these scenarios. Again, I'm not saying thinking through them is going to make them happen. I don't want any of these things to happen. But I've been on the track, and these things have happened. Opponents have lost parts. I've had them bounce. There was a drive shaft. My dad was racing in the mid-90s. I remember watching this happen. The opponent's drive shaft came off the car and bounced into my dad's lane, and it bounced over the car. Right? How can you can't envision how you're going to handle that. You don't know. It could have bounced right through the windshield. I mean, it could have taken him out permanently. But he thinks through some of these things, right? You think through it and you go, well, if it's that kind of situation, I'm probably going to just stay on the gas. I'm not going to let off in that case. If the drive shaft is rolling around, I don't know. I'm going to turn. I'm going to try and hit it perpendicular as much as I can. I don't know. These are the things you think through them. So if it happens, and we never want it to happen, but if it happens, you've thought through it, and now you've already sort of experienced it. All you have to do is put into practice what you've thought through. Now, for new driver training, because that's what the title of this is, there's one more thing, and honestly, I'm not going to touch on it a whole lot, but it's the obvious things. A new driver needs to know how a burnout works. Now, I think I've linked to it before, but Ray Morrison put out a great article on how hard a burnout can be on an engine. I would recommend reading that so that you're not killing your engine by doing a burnout that just won't work well for it. You want to go through the RPM range. You don't want to overdo it. You don't want to push it up against the stutter box. But whatever your burnout procedure is, as a new driver, you want to have talked through it. You want to know exactly what that looks like. For the starting line, what is your starting line game? How, and not game in the sense that you're trying to mess with the other person, but what is your procedure? What are the things that need to happen? Does the fan need to be on? Does the fan need to be off? Does the alternator need to be cut out? Do you need to hit your recordable tack or turn on the race pack, whatever it is? What's the finish line look like? I mean, these are things that are drag racing specific, and you need to have talked through them. Everybody has a strategy. If you're running index, bracket racing, whatever you're doing, you have strategies for how this works, and we're going to touch on all these again, or some of these things we've touched on before. But these are the things that new drivers need to talk about, and I'm sure that you will. If I was bringing a new driver in to race my car, I would talk about all those things. But, I would spend time going, if you lose the brakes, what are you going to do? Ask questions. Think through it. Are you going to downshift? Is that going to be the only thing you're going to do? When are you going to get to a point where you're willing to throw it into park and turn it sideways to scrub speed off, And I almost feel like I have to say, I haven't been to Bondurant or Frank Hawley's drag racing school, so I don't know that I have the exact right answer for how to handle all of these situations. I just know that there are situations that come up, and you need to have thought through. And then also there's the shutdown area, and that actually reminds me of the Frank Hawley video, or the guy who attended Frank Hawley's school in the last couple months, he posted a video about how he basically didn't think through really hitting the brakes as soon as he got past the finish line. And he ended up almost putting it in the sand trap at the end of the track because he was kind of enjoying the process of going fast and didn't think about the slow down and the shutdown area. And so you need to have talked through that, because the first time a guy is in your car, your hot rod, racing it, he's going to just feel so enamored with the speed that he might not know that you've got to get on the brakes. You've got to pull the chute right away, because a lot of times you don't even have as long of a distance to shut down as you did to get up to speed. So you need to be focused on getting slowed down. So those are sort of the obvious things, but just to recap, get to know your car, think through as many scenarios as you can, and then study up on the obvious things. What's the starting line look like? What's your starting line game? What's your finish line look like? What's that game? How's that going to play out? And that's different round to round. That's something you have to go through every round. But, what's the burnout procedure? These are things that the new driver's probably going to focus on, because those are the things that they want to get right. That's what wins rounds. That's what loses rounds, is making mistakes in those rounds. But in those obvious sort of procedures. But the not so obvious things are, what are we going to do to make sure we can race again next week? And that's planning. That's what new driver training is all about. All right, well, I hope that was helpful for you. I hope that what you can take from that is you've got some things to think about before you go racing next time. I know a lot of parts of the country, they're having bracket finals in a couple weeks, so the races that you've been going to every week, you've been accruing points, and you're getting ready to really take it out and see what you can do against other people in your part of the country. So best of luck with that. And these are good things to think through, because we've had our drivetrain components blow up during the bracket finals. Those breakages can happen anywhere, anytime. So nobody's immune, and I hope I convinced you that these are important things to think about too, because again, if we are racing safe, then we are available to race next weekend and every season going forward. I've mentioned a couple resources: WFO Radio, Frank Hawley's Drag Racing School, the Rare Morrison blog article that I thought was super helpful. I'm going to link to those at DragTracker.com/podcast. So go ahead and visit that. Click through there. Hopefully they're useful for you. Feel free to leave us any feedback. We would love to hear from you. And so we're trying to get on a couple other podcasting directories. If you found us, but we're not where you look for podcasts, let me know. I want to submit us so that we're able to reach everybody who's looking for us. That'd be great. We've got the U.S. Nationals coming up. Again, I mentioned the Practice Tree app is on sale on iTunes until August 18th. So there's just a couple hours left. And so I encourage you to check that out if you are trying to ramp up on your practice, your Christmas tree, that game. It certainly will be helpful and beneficial to help you win rounds if you are doing better at the tree. Yeah, that concludes episode 12. We're up to 12 episodes. I feel like it's going great. Hopefully this is useful. I've got a couple of really cool interviews coming up, and I'm excited to share those with you. And I've also got some really cool topics. I was wondering if anybody has any stories about a buddy that they got involved in racing who now is more into racing than you are. So if you've got a friend who really started winning rounds and even maybe beat you, that sounds like a fun story. I'd love to know more about that. What kind of cars y'all raced, where you raced, and just, sort of how that worked out. Maybe it's somebody who used to be your brother-in-law and now is an ex-brother-in-law. Anything related to that. We're also still collecting stories about superstitions, so I'm not going to say anything about underwear again, but if you do have anything that is an interesting superstition, I would love to know more about that. So, soliciting for those specific stories, but as usual, anything you got will be helpful. I don't have any pit etiquette or other stories. I covered a couple stories in our podcast episode today, so hopefully you're not missing that too much. Other than that, we're going to catch you hopefully next week, if not next week, the week after. Until then, race safe, race to win, and take care.